Hello everyone. Another Wednesday night. I feel proud to say that this is a class been going on now for over 31 years without any break. Older than some of you are. So there's something to be said about continuity and perpetuation. When I started, it was never actually meant to be a class in the first place. When we started out back then, it was just a conversation between a few people, and I still like to feel that it's that. Conversation is far more personal and intimate. I can talk about some real issues of life instead of it being a so-called lecture or pontification or preaching and stuff like that. And today we have the internet, so we're also broadcasting the airwaves of the world. So the Hebrew calendar, as I often discuss at length here, is a very rich journey. It isn't just a calendar that we use to designate times and dates, appointments, deadlines, countdowns, etc., but also it mirrors life. The Jewish calendar mirrors our lives. So just like our lives go through an ebb and a flow, peaks and valleys, the ups and downs and twists and turns of life, so too does the Jewish calendar have all the different twists of our personal lives. First of all, we count with the lunar calendar. So there you go, right there you have the waxing and waning of the moon. The phases and cycles of the moon are always changing. There's no day in the month that the moon is in the same position exactly in the way it shines its light toward Earth. And it affects this Earth as well. It's not just a light thing, it also affects the tides. You all remember the Hurricane Sandy. One of the big things was that it was at full tide, full moon, and has a direct impact on this Earth. So we count with the lunar calendar, and thus every day of the month, every day of the year is essentially another phase. And the moon itself is reflective of the journey of life, of the ups and downs, times that we're full strength, there are times when we're just almost extinguished, and then only to be reborn again, like the new moon. As we say, when we say the blessing and the prayer, we bless to sanctify the moon every month. So we say, Shehei Masidin L'Schadish Kamesa. The day, the people, will be renewed like you, the moon. So the moon became a symbol. The Talmud says that we count toward the moon, the Jewish people. We're similar to the moon. And the moon is actually the key, a sign that when the Jews knew they were leaving Egypt. When Moses was told, Passover begins with a new moon. So the story in the book of Exodus is that God speaks to Moses. Be'etzem it says, "Hachedesh hazeh lachem," he tells him. He says, on this day, this is the new moon. And he says, this is a new moon. With this new moon, the moon of Nisan, which is going to be the new moon that we will entering next Sunday. This Shabbos is leading into the new month. This new moon will be the new moon of your life, the moon of your renewal. And indeed, to the full moon, 15 days to the day, when God showed Moses just a speck, it wasn't even a moon. Commentaries wondered, what did he show Moses? There was nothing to see. On the first day of the month, the moon isn't yet seen. But he saw something. He saw the birthing. And this birthing would lead 2 weeks later to a full moon. And on that day, the full moon is when the Jews left Egypt, and that we celebrate Passover, always till full moon. And you'll notice all the Hebrew holidays are around cycles of the moon. Full moon, new moon, Rosh Hashanah is the new moon. Sukkot, Passover, Purim are all full moon. I've discussed this many times here, so I'm not going to go over that right now. Just to emphasize how the calendar mirrors and reflects our lives. So there are periods of great joy. This month of Adar that we're concluding now is a high point in the calendar. And then there's its antithesis, its alter ego, is the month of Av. As much as we add an increase in joy, that's when we diminish in joy, because it's the saddest month of the year. So each month has its place and has its role, and that month also is part of life. And it's appreciating that life is not a flat line. Life is a cycle. And just like a heartbeat, you don't want to have a flat line. You want to have a cycle. You want to have a wave, a balanced wave, an ups and down. The heartbeat, the breathing, that is what defines life. It is mobility, movement. It's only we human beings that have superimposed over the natural dynamic life force that we are, that we've created the concept of a couch potato, of sedentary human beings just sitting, waiting, doing nothing, as they say. But nothing in this universe does nothing. Everything is always on the move. Everything is in transition from one place to the next. Everything is unmoving. Whether it's in the animal kingdom or the vegetable kingdom or the mineral world. Everything has its cycles. Some more obvious than others. The seasons, the weather. Human beings also have, naturally, look at children. Unencumbered, unfettered, leave them be. They're always on the move. That's the sign of life. The expression, kol chai misneya. Everything that's alive is moving. Mobility doesn't mean necessarily physical moving millions of miles. Moving means that there's a constant movement. We're breathing. Our bodies are constantly alive. And death is when things just stop. Becomes inanimate. Today we know in the world of modern physics and new physics and quantum mechanics that there's no such thing as inanimate. Everything has subatomic particles that are constantly pulsating, even when we don't see them, all times. Which is very consistent with the mystical teachings on the Kabbalah and Hasidic thought that the energy is constantly pulsating. It's a constant pulsating energy within existence. You stand by an ocean, you can stand there as long as you like, and you'll see life. It's always alive, and constant change, and constant, relentless power. So the calendar is a great tool. It's a great teacher to teach us about ourselves. And each day in the calendar has its own particular significance. So I was going to discuss. I always try to focus on something I haven't discussed in previous years, because now the previous years have been recorded, so we have the archives. No need to go over that. You can always go back to the videotape, replay, instant replay, and to address something. Human nature is always looking for novelty, something that wasn't discussed before. So I'm thinking of discussing. Tonight is the 25th of Adar. So that also is a day in the calendar, like any day, but every day has its unique power. Every day does its thing, the Zohar says. Every day has its energy. So Chafei Adar is a unique day in its own right. I wanted to address that, and obviously the key thing is taking the relevant and personal lessons, psycho-spiritual lessons to our lives, what we can learn from this day. So the month of Adar in general, as we know, is a month of joy, I mentioned. Month of Purim. But within that month itself, different days have different meaning. We're also coming between Purim and Passover. So the days of the months, or the days of this period in time also leads toward that. As I said, this Shabbos is going to be, besides reading the chapter in the Torah by Yaakov Kudei, the conclusion of Exodus, there's also an additional chapter called HaChodesh. We read the story that I just related, which is when Moses HaChodesh, it's called HaChodesh, which means renewal, but also means the new month of Nisan. So always the Shabbos before the new month, for the new Rosh Chodesh Nisan, we read HaChodesh, the story how Moses looks into the sky and God says to him, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, this will be the new month to you, and from here on you shall always sanctify this new month, and this will become your measuring rod. This will be your way of defining time and also defining your lives. And just as this moon is being renewed now, you will be renewed. And it's quite awesome actually when you think about it, because the same moon that Moses looked at, we look at. No change. Some things don't change. So despite thousands of years have passed, whatever he saw in the sky, we can see in the sky. So we actually relive, we recreate that which happened then. And that will lead, as I said, into Passover, the full moon. So what's Chafei Adar? 25th of Adar. Answer is, the Talmud says that there are two opinions when Genesis happened, when the creation of the world. One opinion is B'chafei Elul Nivra Olam, on the 25th of Elul the world was created, which would mean 6 days before Rosh Hashanah that we celebrate. And the second opinion is b'chafei adar nivra elam. So two opinions. They're 6 months apart. One says on the 25th of El, one says on the 25th of Adar. So that's the first place where 25th of Adar has significance. That according to one opinion, the creation of existence actually. Now, when do we celebrate Rosh Hashanah? We don't celebrate it now. We celebrate it because the ruling follows the other opinion. There's Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yeshua. But the big question everyone asks is, how could there be such an argument? It's an argument about what they call a mitzias, about a reality. Either it happened here or it happened there. No, nobody was there. So what did we hear? What did God tell us? Which one is it? So interesting, the commentaries talk about it, and they answer that they're both right. Now tell me, how do Jews reconcile that? How could you say two separate dates, 6 months apart, are both correct? The answer is, what does creation mean? Of course. And it says like this: if you're talking about the internal creation, that is now the 25th of Adar, and the external is the 25th of Elul. What does external and internal mean? Think of it like a human being. Think of it, you plan to build a new structure, a new building. So when someone says to you, where did it begin? When did you begin building? So you ask questions, you mean when did we actually begin physically building? Or you ask me when we began conceiving of the idea and planning it? Because remember, no one just builds out of the blue. So the answer is, one is b'machshava, one is b'dir, one is an action. There's when you plan it, there's a date for that. That's the 25th of Adar, where we are now. And then there's another 25th of Elul, 6 months later, when the actual structure began. Now, of course, we're talking here in the divine level, so it's a conceptual time. We're not talking about physical time. But nevertheless, two stages. And there's significance to it, because you could say, hey, God doesn't need 6 months to prepare. Human beings need to make plans. We need a blueprint, we need architects, we need to compare bids, etc. God can do whatever he wants, so what's the point? So we're going to discuss a little of that as well. But that's the general gist of it, that there's two dimensions to creation. And as we'll see, there's also two dimensions of how we create things. As I said, there's the planning of creation, there's the actualization of it. For example, we consider our birthdays. When was our birthday? Is it the moment of conception or the moment of birth? The moment of birth is when you emerge as an independent entity from your mother's womb, but that's not when your life force began. You had 9 months prior to that, or whatever the amount of time that you were developing. And yet we consider our birthday, our creation, from the actual, not from the concept, and not from even the seed or the germ, the nucleus. So that's the general answer. But obviously we'll discuss this a little more detail, relevance to us as well, in the context of what this 25th of Elul, 25th of Adar is. So, we talk about a plan. I don't know if any of you have ever been to this Kitty Hawk in North Carolina, which is considered to be, they call it the birthplace of aviation. But if you go to, I believe, Dayton or Columbus, Ohio, Dayton, I think, Dayton, Ohio, they claim that that's where the Wright brothers did all their experiments, and that's where they developed it. So they had a big lawsuit about it. Which town, because it was about tourism and tourist dollars and all that, which town can claim the birth of aviation? So they called one the birth of the concept of aviation or something like that. I don't remember the exact words. And the other one is the birth of actual aviation. Because the testing they did, the first flight they took was in Kitty Hawk, but they lived in Ohio. And that city is acclaimed as being the place where they conceived of it. So that's just as an aside, if you happen to be interested in that. So here too we have the two dimensions, and very relevant in life, because let's go back to how we deal with challenges in our lives. In medicine, we know there's a concept of remedial medicine. Deals with symptoms. A person has a headache, they take a painkiller. We have different type of symptoms, and we react accordingly. But then there's a thing called preventive medicine, or perhaps another way to put it, root medicine, But you don't just address and attack the symptoms, you attack the root. Now obviously in superficial matters, you don't need to go to the root of every problem, because if a problem can be solved easily on a symptom level and get rid of it, great. But when it comes to deeper issues, usually symptoms, in other words, addressing the symptoms are not enough. Because the symptoms are exactly that. They're just symptoms of some deeper problem. And this is true medically in this physical sense. It's also true psychologically and emotionally. How do we deal with most problems? Well, we try the fastest approach. That's the nature of the human being. We like quick fixes. We don't want to dwell on things. We don't want to hear that it's a whole long process. So we try to find a remedy to a particular situation, whatever it is that's bothering us, some type of remedial intervention, solution. But as we know, deeper issues, that usually does not work. Say it never works. So you want to really, in looking for living a meaningful life, looking for living living up to the best of your abilities, actualizing yourself in the fullest sense of the word, you want to really be able to get to the root of things and not just deal with the short term. But in life, because life's challenges affect us all and shape and distort us from our childhood as we grow, what happens is, just like, to use an analogy, nobody gets lost overnight. You travel and you're lost somewhere, you say, I'm lost. It never began, suddenly you got lost. What happened was, you were on some path, some course, you slightly digressed, wavered off, just slightly, and then you didn't stop yourself, you continued on that new course. So step by step, at every step you took, you were farther away from the path until you find yourself, where you are. You have no coordinates, no bearings at all. This is also true psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. Usually when you start catching yourself and saying something's wrong or something's not working, usually long into somewhere off the center path. So if you think of children, let's say, take children as an example, or you plant a seed in the ground, and it grows into a sapling, it sprouts, sapling starts developing. As long as there's free space, and as long as it's being nurtured and watered, this tree will grow, this vegetation will grow into a beautiful tree. Straight, powerful, and so on. What can happen? What can happen is many things. You could have someone not nurturing it, not watering it, so the tree begins to become desperate, and has to resort to all kinds of desperate means to try to nurture itself. You could have a physical impediment. Let's say this tree is growing and it hits another tree, or there's a rock there, so the tree will have to maneuver to figure a way to get around it. You could have weeds that, in a way, rob the tree of many necessary nutrients. I mean, the list goes on. The same is true in our own lives. Think of it, a newborn child has everything going for it, bright future, but then it has to contend with a whole bunch of stuff. Parents, environment, school, friends, events that happen, for good and for bad. And everything that happens is going to somewhat shape this developing, growing child. And the child will compensate for things that it's lacking. The child will do things, to do whatever it takes to try to maneuver, to survive, to exist. You grow into an adult, and by the time you're conscious of yourself, and conscious of your needs, and conscious of your issues, you're far away from those early steps of your life when you were just being in the impressionable years. So if you juxtapose that person, who you are today, to what you were at the beginning, it's going to be a very, very different individual. Even though it's the same person, but there was a lot of adjustments have been made. How many things have not been realized? How many things have just had to go undercover because they had to compensate, and you had to find nourishment, etc. And the list goes on. I don't want to be too specific, because the truth is everyone has their own pathology, their own life, and every one of us has fill in the blanks that fit to you. But we all have this story that I just said. Everyone has. No one's immune, because we all started here and are now here. Now the question is how far these two are apart. If you could really see both images and as I said, juxtapose one over the other, obviously that would give us something to work on, or something to shock us, because you may see, wow, I don't know how that became this. But regardless, we don't have that luxury, because no one's giving us a snapshot of what you looked like when you were a little sapling, just sprout. You may have a picture of yourself, but I'm talking about an X-ray of your psyche, of your emotions, of your spiritual needs, your whole development. So what we have now is we have to deal with the reality of what is now. But that is why it's so critical, and it's why a day like Chofei Oder and Chofei Elul, both of them, those 2 days I mentioned, is critical, because it's not just about history, the beginning, it's our beginning. And knowing beginnings are a critical point in getting anywhere. Because that's the point of departure, that's what you want to look at. So if a person, for example, wanders off, as I said, in the woods, and who knows where they are, the biggest thing they could have is if they had the point of departure. That's why a lot of people, they go into very dangerous or unknown territory. What do? They tie a rope to the point of departure and they follow it. They hold on to it. So wherever they go, they can always get back to where they started. The same is true intellectually. You ever know you have a concept, an idea, and you conceive of an idea, great idea, and then you begin developing it. If you don't write down that original concept, very often what happens is you get wander off in fleshing out the idea. You end up so far away from the original, you say, what was my original point in the first place? And sometimes you can't even remember. So one of the best pieces of advice is, and this is written in the books, is the kuda of chachma. Chachma, it's called the spark of chachma. Write down. You have a spark of an idea. Before you flesh it out, just write down short, 1 line, 2 words, 3 words. What was that idea? You'll be amazed how valuable that will be later when you flesh it out, because you'll go back and say, it'll keep you honest. It'll keep you aligned. And then when you flesh it out, you say, wow, that was the idea. Now, that doesn't mean you have to worship the original concept, but at least to know, to hold on to it, which helps tremendously, and not to be overconfident and think, I'm going to for sure remember, because at this moment I'm so clear, impossible, I'll forget. I'm sure you've had this sensation. And then you realize after a while, no, I don't remember at all. You start trying to remember, what is it that I was so excited about, etc. So this is a general method that works. But as I said, in personal life it's far more difficult, because we don't have the point of departure to look at. So that's why the Torah tells us about the beginning. That there was a day called the 25th of Adar when something began. It's like the collective birthday of existence. We'll talk soon about the difference between that and the one 6 months later or 6 months earlier. But the bottom line is that there's a beginning, which in a microcosm, this is a macrocosm of all of existence, is your birthday. Why is a birthday such a special day? Well, so for many people, a birthday was a special day. At least 1 day a year, people pay a little attention to me, or buy a gift. Some people actually hate their birthdays, despise their birthdays, because if they don't like their lives. Birthdays are not good reminders of how much they were neglected. Everyone forgot their birthday. So wherever you fit in, the bottom line is a birthday is a day. The truth is, from a Torah point of view, a birthday is not just a nice party day. They buy a cake, some gifts, cut together with friends. A birthday is actually a critical day that allows you to realign yourself to where your beginning was. But just one little preface to appreciate this point. In the Megillah we say, in Purim we read, Hayom ha'elim niskarim v'nasim, which means these days should be remembered and they should be acted on. That's a literal interpretation. But the Arizal, the mystic, the holy Arizal, Isaac Lurie, asks the question, what is this additional word v'nasim? Hayom ha'elim niskarim, these days shall be remembered, shall be commemorated. What's the additional v'nasim? And he says something fascinating. He says, this day shall be not just remembered, but it shall be recreated. Because time is energy, and the way time works in Jewish thought is not linearly. Time is not one long river of time, from past, present to future. Time is a cycle, or better put, a spiral. So time is more like a circle like this. And it comes back to its original plane every once a year. The reason we celebrate Passover on that day of the month, once a year, the same day when Passover happened in the first place, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and your birthday, my birthday, is not because we're remembering something happened thousands of years ago. Is because in time, whatever energy existed then is now happening again. So whatever energy happened when you emerged on this earth, which is your birth, happens every year on your birthday. It's not just a commemorative day and they say, okay, that's the day it's on your birth certificate, which transforms the whole experience into something else entirely. Every holiday is actually an opportunity. There's energy in the day that you have power to access. If you create the right containers, the right channels, the right handles, you'll be able to access it. So Passover night, in a few weeks from now, the Monday night, Seder night, is not just another night. We say, Manashtar, how is this night different than others? It's not just because you do rituals. It's the other way around. There's a special energy in the air. And the rituals and the customs and traditions are meant to be like, think of them like instruments that are meant to pluck that energy out from the more ethereal dimension and bring it into our lives. So therefore time is energy, and long before Einstein, this is common mystical teaching. And it affects us, as I said, in our own personal lives. Our beginning, our birthday, is an opportunity to go back to that point. So you'll say, well, how can we go back into the past? Well, you won't go into the past. You can't go back into the past, but you can go to the energy that existed, that brought you into being, and that energy is always accessible. Especially on the day that it returns to that point, that access. That axes, I should say. So, therefore, the significance of the beginning is critical because it's really about your beginning, my beginning. It's like going back. So, lesson number one is that there's hope. There's no such thing as damaged goods. There's no such thing as a lost case. There's no such thing as just a lost soul that wandered away and is unable to. Do you mind opening the window there?
It's open right.
It is?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. There's no such thing as something lost because there's always a connection to that beginning. The challenge is how we connect it, which we'll soon discuss. But the first statement is that that's why this tonight, this Chofei Adar has significance. Now, what's the difference between the two? The two, as I said, the two opinions, or the two dimensions. Well, two dimensions is because, as I said before, with any plan, there's always two beginnings. There's a beginning in thought, and there's a beginning in action. So in a sense, if you want to really connect to your own beginning, there's so-called, when you started breathing and started functioning in this world, and then there's when you began, the concept of you began. So we really have almost like two birthdays, if you want to put it that way. I wouldn't really call it two birthdays. It's one birthday that has two dimensions to it. And therefore, we have both a soul and a body. Is when your body began to function as an independent entity, that's your physical birthday. But there's a step before that. And that step before that is when your soul was chosen by God to send to this earth. And that is also a beginning. And when we talk this month, we're talking far more the soulful part of the birthing, as opposed to the body part, the physical part of it. Which really comes down to this. To the best way, some people always ask the question, I've been asked this question, what is a soul? How would you define a soul? So some people call it energy, divine energy, a lot of different translations for it. I don't know how you think about it. Life force. But I'll give you an analogy, the best analogy that resonates with me at least. I use it in the book Toward a Meaningful Life. Right in the beginning, the first chapter is soul and body. Body and soul. So imagine imagine. You're listening to a piece of music. Or you're playing a piece of music. So you're following musical notes. This music has notes that describe that someone who knows how to read those notes can play the music. Those notes were written by a composer. The composer imparted part of his soul into those notes. The soul, which is the feeling, the sentiment, the message that he wanted to convey with this particular tune. It's then placed in physical notes. We hear physical sounds, and those sounds, played the right order, recreate the spirit and the energy that the composer invested. And you can, in a sense, pick up the sentiment that was the message, the story that was meant to be conveyed. The same thing, of course, can also obviously relate also in literature. An author has a feeling, has an idea, has a story to tell. They convey that story in words because that's the only way to communicate. If the author or the composer would just keep it in their own thoughts, it would never materialize, knowing you can't communicate it to another. So they have to find a language that speaks to another. When we hear it, we read it, we hear it, we play it. We are now using those words, and we can connect to the same sentiment as it was originally created. The souls of the soul, your soul, my soul, are musical notes composed by a cosmic, divine composer who has a plan for each of us, and that plan has a story, has a particular song, has a particular nuance or nuances, particular mission to play, a role to play in life. And then we came into existence. So you're never going to say that a musician or composer first writes the notes and then he figures out what they sound like. That's ridiculous. First he has a feeling, and then he figures out a way how to convey that feeling in a tune. An author has an idea, and then he figures out how to communicate that idea. So we are really concepts. We are spiritual concepts that God conceived of, each with our own particular personality, each unique and indispensable. And what you see in the mirror and what you think you are is just the embodiment of that note. It's just the letters on a page. The problem is that we live in a material world and we have very narrow, myopic vision. So all we see is the letters on the page. And we don't know what message. That's why people say, why am I here? What is my mission in this world? What music am I supposed to play? Most of us don't have an answer to that. When in fact, that's where your beginning is. Your beginning is what music you were meant to play. Now, this goes back to what I said earlier. If we have healthy parents and healthy environments and a healthy society, it will do everything possible, like the trees and the saplings that I was mentioning before that blossom, to do whatever it takes for allow us to emerge, grow, develop, and find our song, find our voice, and find our soul. That's what a soul is. So beyond energy, beyond life force, a soul is essentially your purpose of existence. That raison d'être, your reason that you're here, and that precedes your existence. Purpose always precedes an existence. This is the rule of any design. You see something designed, and you say, okay, what was the purpose? Why did they design this? It didn't begin. First comes function, then comes form. First comes purpose, then comes how you're going. First comes what, and then figure out how. The what is the soul. What are you? What is your real role? Why do you exist? That why defines your soul. And the body that you live in, and your consciousness, and everything you know about yourself is simply the outer dimension that's supposed to express it. In some ways, the way the Hasidic masters put it, the mission in life is to align your outer instruments with your inner purpose, the musical notes with the music. So you look around yourself, you see, I have these skills, I have talents, I have different strengths and weaknesses. These are all indicators of what your inner purpose is. So when you say, in other words, when you look at a page on a piece of paper, the letters are the body, the soul is the message that the letters convey. And that's exactly the way we are. We are letters, walking musical notes on this earth, each with a particular message. And additionally, we all are meant to complement each other. Just like the letters on a page are not independent, they each inform the other, and they all need each other, because you can't read the next word without the previous word. You can't hear the song if you don't have all the notes in place. So this is the definition of soul, and essentially when we talk about a beginning, going back to the beginning, the 25th of Adar, we're going back to the soul, to the root of when you were sent. If you're able to go back to that moment and say, okay, you placed me here, tell me what's the music I have to play, what's my role? That would be the answer. The answer you would get would be the one that comes from your own beginning. So of course we have to discuss how one gets back there and finds that answer. But first we have to just establish that there is such an answer. So right now each of us here is living our lives. If you were to describe your life, your harried life, your organized life, your chaotic life, whatever you want to call it, you're going to come up with a whole bunch of details. What you did today, what you did yesterday, what you did last week, last month, last year, decades. We have a whole list of activities. A lot of it is around work and earning a living. Some of it is around love and relationships. A lot of it is about things that we don't necessarily want to talk about. We have a whole slew of activities that we're involved in. And if you were challenged to try to find, okay, so what's the string? What's the thread? What's the thread that connects all these things? Like, what drives me? Why did I do that for 5 years, 10 years? Even if it's not, let's say, a destructive thing or something unhealthy. Even just plain. Why did I do that? What brought me there? You'll usually find some type of what seemingly seems like a random event. You met somebody, they offered you a job, you had nothing else to do at the time, or it came your way. Okay, I ended up there. I traveled. I came to a place. I met somebody. I met something. I stayed. We have all kinds of hundreds of little things like that are not based on any deliberate plan. They're based on like the random wanderings of a soul on earth, looking for itself, and we're going with the flow. Sometimes it brought to great things. You may have met great people and great events. Sometimes not, and sometimes it's just neutral. You don't neither. It's like it was neither up or down. And again, this is something you have to fill in your own blanks, because we all have our own trajectory, our own life story. But rarely will you find a person that has a very clear mission statement, point of departure, and everything is aligned to that mission. Because no one ever taught us to think like that. We don't have a little box that came with us when we came to earth and said, this is your soul's mission. You see, when great composers compose music, music doesn't have free will. They put it on the page, this is the music. You're going to play it or you don't play it. The musical notes don't have any say. They're sitting there, and either you know how to play them well or you don't. But here, what God did, our musical notes have a lot of latitude to do whatever we want to do. And we don't necessarily align ourselves to what our real music is. So when you ask yourself the question, one day, everybody should live to 120 and 150, 180. Let's say you're 150 years old, a ripe old age and healthy. And someone asks you, okay, so what did you accomplish in this lifetime? And not to make anyone feel guilty or negative, not many people don't really have a good answer for that. No, I'm sure everybody has some things they did that were virtuous and valuable. But to say an overall, overarching mission, something that really defined and said, this is my contribution. As I said, sadly, we're not. When we're children, no one even taught us to think like that. There's a rare people that come to think like that as children, due to beautiful parents and so on. But it's not a common thing. Yes, at some point in adulthood, we do start thinking like that. We start thinking, what mark am I going to make? Am I living up to my potential? What is my calling? Why am I here? But here again, now you're already in the rat race, busy making a living and having to deal with survival. And how much time can you really dedicate to this, what some would call luxury? Which actually is not luxury, it happens to be the core of everything. If a person doesn't have meaning, doesn't have purpose, doesn't have a deeper purpose, what kind of real life is that? Now, I'm sure I'm talking about things that all of you have thought of. The question is, what can you do about it? So that's why we have very distinct markers. We say, here's the beginning, here's the middle, here's the conclusion. And that's why we have a day like the 25th of Adar. It's a distinct beginning. It's a day that in Rosh Hashanah that we celebrate would be identified more the beginning of the action. But this is the beginning of the soul. This is the birthday of the soul, of the purpose. And as such, and there's an energy in the air tonight and tomorrow that actually allows us to retrace steps, to go back to a place that is not trapped by your daily vicissitudes and routines and habits and all the other things that weigh you down. But you have to do something about it. So what is it that a person can do? Well, as always, it always begins with the first step is always consciousness, awareness. Awareness of a problem is half the cure. That's always the rule. If you don't have that, then you're going to just remain going in circles and spinning wheels because you're just trapped in your own dark, blind place. So awareness, consciousness. The awareness that you have a soul inside of you, that soul is unblemished by life's experiences, maybe not on its outer levels, but its inner levels, and that you have absolute hope and confidence is the word, that you can connect to that place. You know? Any of you have ever been tired? Physically tired? You know the sentiment, right? The feeling. Fatigue. Weak. We're just weak, whether it's due to an illness, God forbid, or due to just plain being worn down. We've got times we're weak. You physically feel weak. What do? So the first thing is you long for a little more energy. And sometimes you do something about it. You may take something, you may exercise, maybe a psychological weakness. So you try to do something that maybe motivates you, something that is exciting, something that is stimulating. We have different things. Sometimes we just rest and try to get through it. Why am I mentioning? Because I just want to find a point of reference point, common denominator, where you'll see where we can take this to on a spiritual level. But the thing is very clear that you feel clearly that the energy that you usually have is not there. So you're looking for ways to open those channels. Now, if it's an illness or something else, like some blockage or something, then there are ways. It could be there's something blocking the flow of energy into you. Vitamins you may need, supplements, etc., exercise, as I mentioned. There's different elements. What are you really doing when you do that? You're opening up these blocked channels. But you're confident, and I'm not talking about a person who is hypochondriac or someone who's fatalistic. Someone that believes in the healing process. You're confident, even when you're tired or not so well one day, that you have healing agents inside of you, and that if you do the right thing, you can reconnect to energy sources, resources that will supplement and recreate or regain your original strength. This is a common thing we all do. We find ways to do this. And I'm just using a very simple and very, I can say almost a simplistic example. The same is true with the soul. When a person feels that they don't have direction, guidance, they're lost. They're not sure what they should be doing. They're not sure what their purpose is. Just equate it exactly to what I just said in the physical. It's also a block. It means that there's an energy flow from your soul that is not reaching you, because you're not able to do anything with it because you don't know what it is. So even the mere fact that you're aware of that, just like when a person is weak, is aware they're tired, that's a good thing. Because if you weren't aware you were tired, you could end up hurting yourself. You could end up driving yourself to a point of complete exhaustion. So awareness is half the cure. Awareness is I know I'm tired and I need to access energy. So the awareness of, let's say, confusion, or chaos, or a loss of direction, or a lost soul, or whatever, however you want to define it, or just I don't know what my deeper purpose is. That is a catalyst to bring you to places. Because if you're not aware of it, or you think everything is just dandy, great, then of course you're not going to do anything. It would be like I said, a person who's not well, who's weak or tired or debilitated, and doesn't even know they're that, so they don't even do anything about it. So the first step is to actually diagnose yourself, assess yourself, and say, is it something I want? Do I want to find that my soul's purpose? Now, some people may not even be interested. They say, I'm too busy now for that. I'll worry about that when I retire. Which is an interesting take, to worry about your purpose in life when you retire. As meanwhile, what are you doing? Reason is because we just survive and we are consumed by whatever our immediate needs are. But I'm assuming that someone wants to do something about it, or else if there's nothing, you don't want to do something, obviously nothing's going to happen. So we have a day, it's called the birthday. your personal birthday, and then there's the collective birthday, like this 25th of Adar, that you have the opportunity to rejuvenate and reconnect. But you first need to say, okay, I don't really know, I want to figure out how did I get here when I was once there, or whatever it is. And this applies across the board. It applies to people, for example, who've been in relationships, gotten hurt, and now give up, or given up partially. They don't want their heart to be hurt again. So they keep their heart to themselves. This too is essentially closing off the door. It would be like a person who's weak and just resigns themselves, I'm going to be weak the rest of my life. Now obviously there are fears and risks and so on, but the point is, there is hope, because you have inside of you a reservoir of energy. The soul's purpose is always gnawing at you and is always sitting waiting. Because you wouldn't be here if there wasn't a composer that chose you to play music. And that's going to affect you. Now some people are very efficient at becoming, I don't want to borrow a term, but from Pink Floyd, comfortably numb, to choosing to become so numb that they are not aware of anything else. But as I said, I'm assuming that most people do want to have some awareness, don't want to just be blind and say, you know what, no, more knowledge, more pain. I'd rather not have more knowledge. Let me remain in the dark. And as such, there is a craving, a longing to want to find that music. And above all, just think for a moment. You have beautiful music to sing and play, and you're not doing it. What does that mean? What kind of effect does it have on a person that they have unbelievable power and they're not actualizing it? It's like the equivalent of someone tying you up and gagging you, putting you into a sack in a basement, and not letting you move. Like all the power you have becomes all trapped and rolled up, basically like hostage, being held hostage. It's exactly the terms used actually in the Talmud and in Kabbalah and Chassidus. It says that the neshama beguf, Yeridus neshama, when the soul descends into the body, it's like a hostage in a material world. It's actually called shevi. It's called being like in captivity. And pidyon shvuyim means redeeming the captive, or sometimes called in Kabbalah redeeming the sparks, is literally letting out divine sparks from prison. Where's the prison? The prison is materialism, a material container that traps us. It traps us in its needs, it traps us in its temptations, it seduces us, it keeps us busy because we have to make a living, all the different needs in our lives, our physical limitations. The list goes on. It is essentially like our enemy. But not an enemy in the sense that you cannot redeem yourself. It's a challenge. So one of the first things that the mystics always teach, the Kabbalists and Hasidic masters teach, you have to know that you are in prison. The material world is a prison until you realize otherwise. When I say prison, it doesn't mean that you cannot transform it. It's a prison as long as you don't realize. But when you realize that's your freedom. So in that sense, it's like think of it in terms of I say prison. It's like not letting you see what your strengths are like. Imagine when you have a hammer in your hand, a tool, an instrument. So who should be telling whom what to be doing? Your hand should be telling your hammer, your hand. I think it's a pretty obvious answer, right? So who directs your life? Who's the captain of the ship? Is your body telling your soul where to go? Or is your soul telling your body where to go? So whenever I ask anyone this question, often their first response is, well, I don't even know what my soul is telling me. If I knew what it's telling me, I can make a choice. So by default, essentially, I just go where my body tells me to go. When I say body, I don't mean the physical body, I mean the bodily needs, the body's experiences. My eyes are wandering, I have 5 senses, eyes, ears, taste, touch, smell. I'm stimulated all over the place all the time. That's what's driving my life. Once in a while, I may have something, a little transcendent experience. But how many people can say that their soul is the captain and the body is just a vehicle? So basically, your car is telling the driver where to go. How do you like that? Which will soon be, I think, a reality, they say, in the auto industry. Your cars will tell you where to go. Just a matter of technology. So, as a matter of fact, the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya, sometimes he puts it this way, and it's like when he puts it, it's very sad to hear. He says, in Tanya he says, and in other places he says, When a person starts contemplating on their lives, they can start crying and beg for compassion for my soul that is trapped in this dark place. And sometimes doesn't even have a clue. It thinks everything is all great. So the first step is understanding that there is a beginning, and there is a place where you began. That's where it all started. And even in science today, with this big search for the Big Bang, all these accelerators they're building to try to recreate the conditions of the first moment of creation, as they call it. And we're talking about scientists. Not talking about in a religious experience or a God thing. They're looking for that first moment, which requires high levels of acceleration, heating particles, trying to create the same conditions as the moment when what they call the Big Bang. Now, obviously, the scientists can't talk about before the Big Bang because there's nothing to talk about. They talk once it's there, what happened. But why is it so important? Why don't they just say that time goes infinitely back into infinity, and there is no beginning? No one says that. Everyone says there's a beginning. The question is whether the beginning created by God, or the beginning created itself, or whatever that means. So fine, that's a matter of semantics, frankly. Probably. But everyone says there's a beginning, that there was an explosion. Now, what was there the moment that the explosion, that caused the explosion? So, some gases. So we're not going to get into now how those gases got there. But they want to know what happened that moment when the stars collided, or whatever happened that started what they call solar systems. Why do they want to know that? Because when you know what happened at the beginning, it's not just a nice curiosity. You actually can understand what is today. Because we are not living in a vacuum. We are a product of that beginning. That's the point of departure. That point of departure, when they discovered those particles, will help us understand how it became where we are now. Or think of it like going back to the child. If we can understand the first cell, how it's fertilized, the egg is fertilized by a seed, and a child develops those earliest stages, you will understand yourself today, because that's where it all began. So it's not just a nice exercise in history or exercise in curiosity. It's really understanding us to the core, is knowing how we were when it all began. Because that's how it is in the purest form. After that, you can then distinguish what was added on, what is superimposed, what is natural, what is not natural. As I said before, juxtaposing you today to what you were like back then is critical to making any type of game plan. In an interesting way, actually, when you use Torah methodology, Hasidic methodology, for psychological purposes, to help people grow, it's exactly what you're doing. You're trying to see what your archetype looks like before it was affected by experiences. Because that's you. Now we have to figure out, like, what are the growths? What are the it's like what I often bring what Michelangelo said. When they asked him about how he carves, he sculpts these beautiful angels. He said, I see the angels trapped in the marble, and I carved and set her free. In other words, it's in there. Your purest you is right now inside of you. But then things started to grow. An add-on here, crust collected, dust gathered. I mean in the metaphorical sense. Even in the physical sense. You ever see when they take an X-ray of your lungs? You'll always see they have your lungs and they have healthy lungs. Why? Because you want to see how it came from here to here. Because you need to juxtapose. You want to see something. You need to compare it to what is the pure form of that same thing. Everything works that way. If you don't have a model, then you don't know what to compare. You don't know how to grow. You don't know what to do. Maybe it's already fine. So you need to know, what does it look like a perfect circle? Then you can say, okay, my circle juxtaposed is not perfect. Here's what I need to work on. We're coming in a few weeks to the counting of the Omer. So many of you familiar with my book on the topic. So it's about refining yourself. But it's not just, become a better person. It's actually specific. There's 7 weeks, and 7 weeks have 7 days in each week. And the first week focuses on love, and then 7 dimensions on love. And you can actually zero in, pinpoint, what exactly is an area of your strength and what's a weakness. And when you pinpoint it, then you start saying, oh, okay, this is the way love should be, but look how it is by me. And then you can figure out, how do I repair this piece? What can I do to compensate? It's like in anything. When you have strength in a certain area, weakness in another, you have to do something to compensate. A few years ago, a psychiatrist who works in a rehab center in Salt Lake City called me, and he said that he wants to thank me for the Omer book, because he says he uses it as a mandatory exercises for everyone in his rehab program. It's drug and alcohol. And he said to me, I tell you why, because we always tell people, take upon new resolutions, fix your life. You're an addict. Here's how you do it. There's being charitable. There's volunteer work. There's all kinds of different methods to help people rebuild their lives, and so on. He said, but this is the only place he found where there was actually zeroing in on actual specifics of your personality, not just be a better person. Today you're going to be giving, so you're going to make a list of things you did today that helped another. But actually break down, some people's strengths are, let's say, in chesed and love, but they're very weak in discipline. Others are strong in discipline, but very weak in giving. They know how to withhold, they don't know how to give. Then you have compassion, and you have endurance, and you have yielding. It's a whole slew of things. It's a whole list of 49 different elements. Here's not the place to go through all of them. The point I want to make is that is how you go back to your beginning. You realize, here's your pilot, here's your model rather, your archetype, here's you, and and you start saying, I don't have to resign myself to my life as it is. Just like that weak person or person who's ill doesn't have to say, you know what, I'm ill and that's it, it's too bad. No. You can regain your energy, you can regain your strength, and you can regain your focus and direction. Obviously it takes work, it takes courage. It doesn't happen just because you want it to happen, you have to work on it. But if you do, you can realign yourself. So you can't go back necessarily into the engineering room technically and just rewrite your code and script in the physical sense, but you could rewrite a lot of it, because we're not dealing here with time. If you reconnect to that soul that was there then is also there now. It's a matter of connecting to it and then bringing it outward into your life, and that can change everything. I've seen it with my own eyes how people have done this. But it requires, as I said, two key things. Number one is that you have to believe it's possible. If resignation becomes your default state, then you're your own worst enemy. You don't have confidence in yourself. You don't think it's possible. If you don't think it's possible, how can anyone help you? Even if I thought it was possible and you don't think it's possible, how is that going to work exactly? No one can do it for you. So it's true. You may not need. It's not. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Yes. At the same time, if I'm for myself, what am I? We do have friends. We have support. We have people we can lean on. But it needs a little of your effort. It needs some hope. Sometimes when I speak to people who tell me that it's all bleak, and Lord, they see no hope for themselves. It's not easy to fight that, because what am I supposed to tell them? Oh no, you're wrong. Okay, and they say, hey, you're right. That's a good idea. That there's hope, because there's a reason they came to hopelessness. Nobody likes to come to hopelessness. It's not like anyone planned that. It's because a result of a lot of pain or loss and trying and failure and so on, and sometimes your own blind spots, etc. So it's not. What do you say? So my answer always to that is, I'm not going to go to war with somebody's attitude because it's coming from somewhere. What you want to just do is leave one little door open. You just say to them, listen, is it 100% everything is closed? Or is there 1% that maybe something can work? Very few people are going to say it's 100%. Just intelligently you don't say that. That was like, what you want to do is give people, it's like someone who's drowning. You can suddenly say, okay, let's learn how to swim. You're in the middle of desperate drowning, you're not learning how to swim. But if you get one little finger in there where you could say, here, hold on to this straw. Then you give somebody something to hold on, then you can build upon it. It's like creating a beach, what do they call it? A beachhead. A type of some raft that begins to build on it. And Judaism is brilliant in this, because it's all about details. It could be saying in the morning, Moda'ani, which you talk about beginnings. That's a beginning. In a microcosm, just like we have the collective soul beginning on the 25th of Adar, we have the personal soul beginning in your birthday. We also have every morning in a mini birth. When you wake, You wake fresh, new morning after night sleep. Your soul is refreshed. You've been rejuvenated, hopefully, to some extent. So we say, what was the first thing we say in Jewish tradition? We say, Modani. I acknowledge what? For my soul, for Shachzarta, that you've returned my soul to me. This isn't a small little nice prayer. This happens to be a very profound statement. You are immediately, before you do anything else, you're acknowledging the connection to your beginning. And today is a new day, and it's not yesterday. And you're not just a product of yesterday's problems. But unfortunately, what happens is a new day wakes up. Yeah, maybe the first second you think that everything's gone away, and then you say, "Oh, all my problems are still here with me." You know why? Because you let those problems settle in. But if a person did connect to their soul that moment, and so, not necessarily complete transformation, a little glimmer of hope, a little ray of light, that can be the difference between life and death. And it doesn't always come when you want it to come. I know many times you can tell somebody, you keep persistently giving them a positive message, and at some point there's a breakthrough. At some point something happens. And you don't always know when it is. I've seen this many, many times. People told me everything is bleak, impossible, it's never going to work, etc., etc. I am as obstinate as they are. I always tell people like that, I said, you represent the world of darkness, I represent the world of light, and I'm just as obstinate as you are. I tell you, light is everywhere. And what happens is, if you're consistently persistent at it, it like starts having its effect. It's like the story with Rabbi Akiva with the drops of water. Powerful story, psychological story, very relevant. The classic, the story. If you don't know, I'll share it. So Rabbi Akiva was 40 years old. 40 years old is not a young man today. Anytime, meaning relative to, and personally, he was a man that did not know anything in his Judaism, Torah, and so on. Meets this beautiful woman who ends up being his wife later. She encourages him to start studying Torah. And for him it was too late, 40 years old already, he's going to start studying, doesn't know the basics. Anyway, he's pondering his life, walking in the woods, and he comes by a waterfall. And he sees the water dropping, and he sees at the side an interesting phenomenon. He sees a stone that has a perfectly a hole bore right through it. Like perfect, like someone carved it. Wondering who would carve a hole like that in a stone. As he continues to observe, he notices the waterfall. The drops of water are falling right into that hole. And he realized that over the years, the water kept, it's called a Chinese torture. The water kept dropping until the point where it actually bore a hole. And he learned a lesson for himself. Now, you can imagine he wasn't a simple man when you find out what became of him. He learned the lesson that it's not about cold turkey. It's not about cramming it all into one moment. It's persistence. It never stops. It's relentless persistence. Long before Lexus coined the word, the relentless pursuit of perfection. I don't know if perfection is the right word. Relentless pursuit. And that's when he committed. He finally decided, yeah. And what ends up happening with him? He doesn't just become a scholar. He becomes the greatest Talmudic scholar. Kula aliba de Rabbi Akiva, the Talmud says. Everything in the Talmud goes according to Rabbi Akiva. Great master teacher. It's an unbelievable lesson. Because if he was 10 years old, I'm not saying 40 years old in many ways is young, but it's not young as far as a developed personality. 40 years old is a person who's halfway through his life, if not more or less. Those days for sure it was people didn't live as they live today. But the lesson was that the consistency. Say kfiyas itim l'Torah kfa, asay teroscha kfa. What does kfiyas means? It means to designate. Every morning, that modani that I mentioned, that's how you fight despondency and darkness and hopelessness. It's not some major breakthrough like an epiphany. If that happens, great, but that's not usually how it works. And if that happens, it's not going to last either. But the slow, consistent commitment. So you need two things for that. You need to really believe and have that confidence. What I said before, that in your own beginning. And what do we ask in confidence? This is your beginning, your root. Your purest form of you has everything for the taking. It's music. It's music, and it's your music. When's the last time that music played? Do you even know what it sounds like? Imagine people don't even know what their own song sounds like. Thoreau put it quite depressingly. He said, most men lead lives of quiet desperation. I don't know if he meant women too, but it doesn't matter. And they die with their song still inside them. So long before Thoreau, this is basic Aleph Beis of Yiddishkeit, of Jewish thought, that each soul has music. It's your song. And there's no two voices that are alike. Yes, we have overlap, and we have parallels, and we have similarities, obviously. But there's no two faces are alike. Ein pertzefein shavas. The faces are not alike. Ein deasein shavas. Our thinking is not alike. And there's nothing about us we have money common denominator, but all of us have something unique. Indispensable is the right word. And that is your obligation and gift, actually, to find that song. So knowing that it's there, even if you don't know that, even if you can't see it, is critical, because without that confidence, without that, then you're going to give up as soon as it's difficult. But if you know there's a treasure, and you know absolutely, and your people you trust that tell you there's a treasure, that obviously is a great motivator. Especially when times are rough, and when you don't have that much strength and so on. And then, of course, the second thing is that persistent pursuit of it. To do things. To act that way. Sometimes you act like you have a special song, and you suddenly discover you actually have one. Which means to do things that you may not that are not in your comfort zone. If you find someone, a mentor or someone you trust, and then you say to them, "Tell me what you think I should be doing," and they suggest something, do it even if you don't like it. In other words, acting and looking to find that song. If you're never going to try, then for sure it's going to remain hidden. So when someone says, "Okay, let's try to write something or try to speak," say, "I don't like to speak in public. I don't like to write. I don't like to this." Most of these opportunities doesn't mean you have to necessarily become the greatest speaker or the greatest writer, but it means by testing you may find out that you have a voice that you never knew that you had. I find most people are afraid of themselves. They're afraid of that. They're afraid of failure, obviously. Afraid of being laughed at. They're afraid of failure, essentially, and therefore never even try. So how could you even find your voice if you don't even try? So yes, you need a trusting environment. You need a place where you can express yourself. Today the internet strangely has a mix of positive and negative, where people anonymously just have no problem writing anything because no one knows it's them, so there's no failure there. But at the same time, that doesn't give them confidence in themselves, because they think if anyone knew, then there's always that other side. But there is something to be said of trying something, whether it's a hobby or a talent or anything like that. So when you say Modani in the morning, it's not just I acknowledge my soul was returned to me. Why don't you do something for that soul today? Why don't you think what could that soul be expressing that my unique power that another person does not have? Some people have tremendous levels of empathy that they haven't exercised in years. They just have an empathy for human beings. There are people who have, I can go down the whole list of all the 7 emotions that I mentioned, whether it's love, discipline, and I mean discipline in a good way. Some people are excellent at breaking down things into details. Others are very good at the big picture. Some are emotional, some are intellectual, some are intuitive. Everybody's got their strengths. The thing is, we don't live in a world where, especially once we're adults and we're in the workplace, we don't have environments where we feel that we can incubate those strengths. That was where school was supposed to be. When you were in school and you had good teachers and good friends, it was meant to be a place where you can experiment and exercise your mind and your ideas and so on. Once we're busy making a living, that's what drives us. So that's why we have to find environments like that. That's why it's a very healthy thing to have once a month or once a week, maybe host something, or alternate with a few friends. Host an evening where we're not just drinking and playing cards. But talk a little about, take upon a project. There's a very popular thing in the United States today, these book clubs, especially women's book clubs. And I hear great things from it, because people come and they read a book, it stimulates, and you see people's voices start emerging. You need environments where creativity and music and song, and I don't mean just the physical sense of it, I mean the whole artistic, creative energy is valued. And when you're in an environment like that, with like kindred spirits, they tend to bring out unbelievable things. Volunteer for a project. Call someone up you respect, an organization, an entity, anything. Say, I like to participate. Tell me what things we need. And you never know. You suddenly discover you're excellent at a certain component in doing this. And number one, you start realizing your own strengths. Number two, you're actually helping others. Now, all these things are they're very easy to do. Everybody's got some extra time in that sense. The thing is, we need to be focused and determined this is important and a priority. So I'm making his suggestions. Once you hear this, now you don't have an excuse that you haven't heard suggestions. And the list goes on. These are just some ideas that came to me. But they're all about one thing: connecting yourself to your beginning. And there's only one way to do it, by actually committing to do certain things. I was a few months ago, more than 7-8 months ago, there was a guy who came to me who, on paper, seemed like his life was perfect. But it was far from perfect. Come from a very wealthy family, so money's not an issue. Okay, so that's out. He's a handsome guy, people like him, but he's basically miserable. As he put it to me, I'm in a gilded cage. Everything is made out of gold, but there's no life, no soul. And he just came. He was at this class, and I know him from the different journeys in New York. And he asked me what I think he should do. And he really could do anything, because he didn't have to work. He could go study. He could do this. He could travel. That's what he did. He was like a sugar baby, sugar daddy, as they call him, right? But it was with no direction, and obviously his life was spiraling out of control and getting worse and worse. So I made a small suggestion. It just came to me. I don't know why I made that suggestion, and it changed his life, as he's told me. I said to him, I think you should volunteer to go and work in a hospice for needy children. And once a week, you should spend an hour or two with a needy child, Down syndrome. Plenty of needy children, unfortunately, and just spend time. They always can use volunteers. They always can use someone to walk these children, to play with them. First he looked at me like I was nuts. I'm telling him this guy's like literally going to be a billionaire soon, etc. He doesn't need to be doing that. I said, yeah, you're coming to me for my advice and then you don't like it? So why are you asking me? You want me to tell you what you want to hear? I'm telling you what I think you should do. And he respected me. He just was initially shocked by it, which was to me a good sign, because that itself is good, to do something that is not what he didn't, that didn't fit on his menu. And to his credit, he went and did it. He found himself. He told me, what could I do? I said, I'm not going to give you now. You do it. You're an adult. You figure out where to find. I gave you the advice. That's it. I'm not making phone calls for you. No, that was intentional as well, because I wanted him to want to do it. Anyway, he started doing it. He stuck to it. And just maybe 3-4 months ago, he told me he's not doing it once a week anymore. He's doing it 4 times a week. That's on his choice. And he says it's unbelievable. First of all, he says to me, he thinks he's getting more from them than he's giving to the kids. That's number one. Number two, first time in his life, he's doing something that he sees effect. He's helping. And which is something he couldn't buy. No one could give him. He had to do it. Small thing like that. And he's realizing that he has all kinds of strengths, and he never even thought, because he was never forced to be in a situation where he had to care for somebody. So he's going to be fine. I've no doubt about it. This is a good story. There's one of the stories that are more nightmares than this. This one happened to have a happy ending. There's plenty more to go, but I see already it's changed completely, because he's completely not in the comfort zone. He's doing things that he never. Why would he be going to a place where there are needy children, etc., etc., special children? Anyway, the list goes on, but what it did for him, it connected to him who he really is, instead of what this whole superimposed personality based on his privileges and entitlement and all the other politics in his own family and all the wars going on there, etc., that always come along with this stuff. And I asked him recently, I said to him, so how is it affecting you and your family? He says, first of all, I feel less dependent on them. I don't feel like I need them. And number two, they don't know who I am, because I'm no longer like in the club. I'm no longer playing the game that we all played. I have my life. and I have a valuable life. I mean, I don't know what's going to end up with him. He could end up becoming maybe a director of a place like that. I don't know. Maybe he'll build. Who knows what he'll do? But I just saw a small thing like that. It was just a small little effort. It was nothing dramatic. It didn't take much. Was it once a week for an hour? I mean, we could find an hour, I'm sure, once a week. And the key is that you cannot continue doing what you're doing if you want to have different results. I don't have to keep repeating the line, what is a sign of insanity? You keep doing the same thing and you expect different results. And we all quote it, and we have it on our bumper stickers, and we have it on our refrigerators, and it still doesn't change anything. What does that say? It's a nice line, right? It's a nice concept. So it's like we say, the line I've coined here was that change. If nothing changes, nothing changes. That's what they say, right? So if you think what you thought, and you say what you said, and you do what you did, what are you going to have? What you had. But we all want something that we didn't have, but your thoughts and speech and action are exactly the same. So where exactly is it going to come from? Tell me. From where is it going to be delivered from? When you have nothing in you that one shift. So there's no way out of this except to realize it's not so easy. But it's also easy if you just simply set your mind to it. If you're desperate for it. That's the word I want to use. And I know we hate the word desperate, because desperate is always associated with negative things. I don't want to be desperate. But some things are very good to be desperate for. It's good to be desperate for meaning in your life, and it's good to be desperate for purpose. It's good to be desperate to find your song and find your voice. If you're not desperate, how do you think it's going to happen? By like one optional, if it's optional, it's good to be desperate for love. I don't mean desperate that you do desperate things and destructive things, but I mean desperate like it's not an option. That's what I mean. You have to want it, really want it. That there's not like, oh, if I have it, great, and if I don't, it's also great. Or I'll work it out. That doesn't mean you have to be miserable. I didn't say desperate is not miserable. Desperate means that it's important. You wake up in the morning, this is compelling. It's a sense of urgency. And without that, usually we become quite, let's call it, mediocre. Because there's nothing, we're not challenging ourselves. So, as we enter this 25th of Elul, as I said, the birthday of the world according to one opinion, but it's the birthday on a spiritual level, on the soul level, as the Arizal explains. It's an opportunity to make such a decision, and just in a few days from now you're going to have a new moon that will be at another energy of renewal. And you'll see consistently these messages are everywhere. Jewish thought is all with messages that your life, you're not stuck. There's no such thing as being stuck. That's the way victims speak. I'm stuck. Even a statement like saying, I find myself in a situation. Well, no, you don't find yourself in a situation. You put yourself in situations. My father was a journalist. In journalism, they always say there are three types of people. People who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who ask what happened. Okay? You have the power to make things happen because you have a unique voice, a unique soul. This is, to me, the core, quintessential essence of Judaism. And it's actually a universal message for every human being, frankly. So when you read, what is the first word of the entire Torah? Beginning. That's the first word, Bereshis. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Why do we need to know that? It happened. It's a historical fact. Who cares what happened? So it happened. Now we're now there. We're no longer there. We're away from that. So as I mentioned before in science, why do they need to know the first moment of the Big Bang? Why are they looking to recreate it? Spending millions and billions of dollars to create colliders and all kinds of things to figure out that first moment, what happened when that Big Bang happened? What kind of dust? What particles? What are the ingredients? And so they say things happen at that moment that for a split second, never again did you have particles that existed that first moment. Why do they need to know it? Because that's how you understand yourself, is by knowing your root. There's no such thing as a tree without a seed. You want to understand the tree, you need to understand the seed. So the entire Torah starts with that. Bereshis, you have to always know there's the beginning. And the beginning is what keeps you honest. It's the point of departure. And allows you to align yourself no matter where you get lost. If you can align it back to where you began, that's the solution to our problems. And it's absolutely doable because that beginning is with us right now. It's wedged within us in our existence. And it's a matter of, as I said, two things: awareness of it and the persistence. Persistence, step by step by step. And by doing that, you allow yourself to revisit, to reconnect to that moment. I always talk about children in that sense. You look at children. Children are a perfect example, because children are the pure you was when you were a child. Even on a physical level, I mentioned about lungs and so on. You look how children, their bodies work before they've been toxified by toxins and all the other stuff that we breathe and eat and assume. There's a certain purity, and then our organs and our limbs and our bodies begin to absorb other stuff that weakens and compromises everything from breathing, from how our heart beats, and same thing is our psyches and our souls. So hang around with people that are confident and that give you confidence. Not good to be around people who are misery loves company. I know people who are always looking for how things can't work out. When you're with a team, you want to know that there's winners and that everybody's involved in the process of succeeding. You know that joke they tell about the Jewish rowing team who was always losing the competitions. So they decided to get one of the Jewish guys, says, listen, why don't you go sneak into the Harvard club somewhere, the Harvard rowing club, and figure out how these Gentiles are winning all the time. Okay, so they sneak in. The guy comes back. He says, I see the secret. There, one guy is yelling and everybody else rows. You know, there's a rowing team. By the Jews, one guy rows and 9 people are yelling at him. And by then, one guy is yelling and 9 people are rowing. So you want to be with people that are rowing, not yelling. And everyone's the captain of the ship, and who's driving, we don't really know, but everyone's telling you what to drive. In the olden days, in the Soviet Union, with Tsarist Russia, so the Jews would hide from the draft, because the Tsar would draft people for 30, 40 years. It was so they would hide, but the Tsar would send soldiers to go find the people hiding from being drafted into the army. So they came into a house, and they see behind a curtain 2 people hiding. They open up the curtain. It's 2 90-year-old old Jewish guys. And they say, what are you hiding from? You know, you're 90, you're not. They say, and generals you don't need, you know? they saw themselves, generals, they're generals. General darf nicht haben, they said in Yiddish, that's how it went. So there are people, there's like they say, there are armies where the soldiers think they're generals. And what you need is an army where the generals know they're soldiers, and that there's a battle going on, a good battle, and having people around you. It's like an incubation thing. Hang around people that are driven and have this type of attitude. Guaranteed they'll rub off a bit on you. And the other way is also guaranteed. Hang around people less driven and people who are into the resignation mode. You can imagine what it's going to do to you, and it's going to feed into all your own lowest expectations. So, my friends, as we enter next month, in a few days, into the new month of Nisan renewal, Chodesh Hazeh, and tomorrow's Chafei Adar, which is the 25th of Adar, a birthday, collective birthday, an individual birthday. We have the opportunity to tap into these energies. As I said before, time is a cycle, like a spiral. So when it comes to a point in time, same point in time every year, like your birthday, it's not just a nice memory. Like the Arizal said, Hayomim ha'elim niskarim v'nasim, that you don't just remember, but nasim, you recreate. The same thing happens that time of day, that time of year, something happens. Even scientifically, by the way, seasons. A certain time, and all the trees will begin to react a certain way. Every time, that same period in time, every year again. So you see clearly from the seasons that it's not just the past. That same point in time is a cycle, and that cycle repeats itself again and again. So we should all use it very well, and find that commitment, find that thing that connects you to your beginning, to your genesis, to your root. And if you need more suggestions, I'm more than happy to provide them, besides the ones I've already suggested. So please see me and the Meaningful Life Center as a resource. If anybody needs any help with the Passover Seders as well, we'll be coming to that. In addition to that, I would like to also say that we have the Omer book here. Yeah, okay, so that's available. And I'm excited to also announce we're creating an Omer app this year. Finally. An application, called an app, that's what they call it. And that should be a useful tool. Or also, if anybody's interested in helping sponsor it, to help develop it, we can do different dedications, whether it's displaying it by day or by week or through that whole 49 period. We encourage you or help. I would be honored to partner with you in that. And do we have also Beyond the Letter of the Law here? Okay, we'll have that next week. So we have also a book that we published this past year. It's on the Pirkei Avot, which is also studied after the Passover. It is on the ethics of the fathers. Pretty cool book. And besides that, Philip will be giving his class, I'm assuming. Yeah, I think so. You could check with us. That's tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. And we will continue our journey next Wednesday. And I bid you all a pleasant evening. Enjoy the weather. The wind, or whatever. The good news is that the weather reports usually don't end up being correct anyway, so hopefully it's for the better. And until next week, thank you very much.